Il senso religioso o l'esperienza religiosa è innanzitutto un fatto, un fenomeno obiettivo, un fatto reale, non è un'idea, innanzitutto non è un modo di sentire, non solo si tratta di un fatto, di un avvenimento, ma del fatto più imponente e più inestirpabile della storia dell'uomo. Più imponente, più vasto, che neanche il fenomeno dell'amore dell'uomo e della donna, che neanche il fenomeno del rapporto tra genitori e figli. Perché il senso religioso è un avvenimento che pone, che afferma o che ricerca l'orizzonte entro il quale acquisti senso anche il rapporto tra l'uomo e la donna, anche il rapporto tra genitori e figli. Perciò è più vasto, perfino di quelli.
Dieci racconti di solidarietà e aiuto concreto. Storie ricche d'amore, riscatto, coraggio e cura. Storie di persone che donano e che ispirano a costruire una società inclusiva. Una mano a chi sostiene. Storie.
Il senso religioso o l'esperienza religiosa è innanzitutto un fatto, un fenomeno obiettivo, un fatto reale, non è un'idea, innanzitutto non è un modo di sentire, non solo si tratta di un fatto, di un avvenimento, ma del fatto più imponente e più inestirpabile della storia dell'uomo. Più imponente, più vasto, che neanche il fenomeno dell'amore dell'uomo e della donna, che neanche il fenomeno del rapporto tra genitori e figli. Perché il senso religioso è un avvenimento che pone, che afferma o che ricerca l'orizzonte entro il quale acquisti senso anche il rapporto tra l'uomo e la donna, anche il rapporto tra genitori e figli. Perciò è più vasto, perfino di quelli.
Dieci racconti di solidarietà e aiuto concreto. Storie ricche d'amore, riscatto, coraggio e cura. Storie di persone che donano e che ispirano a costruire una società inclusiva. Una mano a chi sostiene. Storie.
Civiltà dell'amore, fratelli e sorelle costruite senza senza stancarvi mai questa civiltà. Lavorate per questo, pregate per questo, soffrite per questo.
Buongiorno a tutti.
Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Welcome to this session entitled Living Universe, a Scientific Inquiry on the Meaning of Nature, organized by Ieresis. I am Paola Platania. I'm a researcher and scientist at the Institute for Science and Technology of the CNR of Milan, and I deal with research on nuclear fusion in particular. Then for many years, I've worked within the observative cosmology of Marco, and I've studied physics. We have today with us Giorgio Dieci and Marco Bersanelli. These are our guests. Giorgio is a full professor of molecular biology at the University of Parma, and generally speaking, he studies the regulation of the genic expressions, so how what is contained in gene material is implemented in order to allow organisms to build cells and lives. So then, in cooperation with philosophy, carries out multidisciplinary studies on nature of organisms. He was in charge of many national and international projects, president of biology course, training course, and also director of Sciences of Life and Environmental Sustainability at the University of Parma. He published many articles and books, and also is a lecturer in cooperation with the cultural associations and schools, and he has been joining for 15 years Ieresis activities. Marco Bersanelli is full professor of astrophysics at the University of Milan. He studies the first light of the universe, microwaves. He worked for several laboratories, including research work at the South Pole, and also joined the Planck mission of ESA that carried out the microwave cosmic background studies, and currently is engaged in new experiments in order to detect the traces of cosmic background primordial traces. He published many scientific articles, and is also the scientific director of Ieresis, and he deals with also scientific knowledge, and also with body, it works for a body that deals with young people training. In 2022, a delegation of the meeting of Rimini joined the Sharjah Book Fair in the Arab United Emirates, one of the most important book fairs in the world. And these Rimini meeting delegation joined two conferences. The first one to talk about the meeting, and the second one was about faith and science, and Giorgio and Marco had a dialogue with Islamic culture, and so they tried to use a language and explore a language that shares a lot with that culture, and that language that they used was the language of science. Some of the organizers of that book fair have joined the meeting this year, and they had a session on the 21st of August. So Giorgio and Marco are going to share with us today the conference that they delivered on that occasion. So when it comes to human and animal life, down to microorganisms and beyond, we see a dynamic that we see every day. So, in other words, when we interpret the signs that we get from nature, we somehow try to find the meaning going beyond those signs. And here we come at the main topic of this lecture. It is extremely important to double check that this dynamic does not belong just to humans, but it belongs to human beings being human. So it involves atoms, cells, molecules, and as Marco will tell us, these are the basic building blocks of matter, and they come from the cosmos. So this is our connection to cosmos. So before leaving to our two guests, well, I want to share a personal remark. So I've tried to think over my own experience, in particular on the link between the exterior dimension that goes down to atoms and the interior aspect. So the conscience, which is typically human, that, for instance, we see emerge when it comes to the encounter between our senses and reality. So the interior and exterior dimensions are connected. So the atom is a absolutely essential element for human conscience, and the human conscience casts a bright light on atoms themselves. But often we feel these two things as separate, as if there was a gap between these two dimensions. So, well, certainly our guests will be able to shed some light on that. And I asked them some questions. So, how deep is this connection between human beings and nature? And I mean the nature of the human body and the nature, in general. And is this connection between the interior and the exterior dimensions help us rediscover a connection between man and nature, helping us fix the environmental crisis? So these are just some opening questions, but now I give the floor first to Giorgio and then to Marco, and I hope they will help us get a better understanding of all this. Thank you.
Benissimo, grazie.
Thank you. Thank you, Paola, for your nice words of introduction. Well, I'm really grateful and I'm thrilled of being here. It's a great opportunity for me to share with you the thoughts of the work we carry out together also with Marco. Every time we meet, new interesting aspects emerge. Generally, when we consider nature as an object of scientific inquiry, we tend to look at it as a sum of physical factors characterized by an ultimate passivity or neutrality, in which every phenomenon is the ineluctable result of blind forces. Words like sense, meaning, are excluded from the usual vocabulary of natural science because, as the philosopher Robert Spearman notes, there is a prejudice, these are these words, which has become dear to science, the prejudice that sense is a variant of non-sense and reason a variant of non-reason. But as Paola was saying before, this is an issue because man struggles to integrate his being that is made of a research of sense in a construct of nature from which the dimension of meaning has been taken away. And this is an important element in the crisis of the man-nature relationship. And it is not always sufficiently taken into account. So in the next 10 minutes, I would like to offer an insight into a rethink of this prejudice, and I will do so within my discipline, biology, molecular biology, where I had the opportunity to get to know many things, many aspects of living nature. And so I would like to start with something familiar. This is an avenue of lindens that lead to the village where I live. And I show this to you because the air is impregnated by the smell, the perfume of the lindens. So this is an experience that makes us think of nice memories. So for instance, for me, it was the end of the school year and the beginning of the summer. So this is linked for me with the smell of lindens. So it is in a way a sensorial experience which is triggered by the presence of molecules. These are volatile organic compounds that are produced by the flowers of plants when they blossom, and there are about 1,000, 2,000 different molecules. And so they are, as I said, molecules that can be transported in the air, and they are produced by plants through their metabolism, and they move away from their place of origin. And in the flowering period, they are part of what the plant is in a way. They're like an expansion of the plant through the air. So what I would like to say is how this sensorial perception is generated. But before that, I would like to make a comment. These molecules are significant in many different ways within different worlds. So they are, in a way, signs that refer to something else. And this something else is different for different interpreters. For instance, there are bees attracted to these flowers, and for them, their meaning is different from the meaning these flowers have for me. But I consider that, as we are discovering, plants can communicate with other plants through these compounds. So these molecules can take on another different meaning. And what I'd like to stress is that when an example, a molecule, becomes a sign, this sign is no longer limited to its molecular structure. It is a sign for an insect, a microorganism, a human being. So there is a new relational quality, and it has different meanings. So this sign has different references according to the different cases. So here we have a reality of the volatile molecule that is not limited to its molecular structure. How is it that we humans perceive this experience? Our olfactory system is very, very complex, and it is extremely important that there is a small extension of a tissue that is inside our noses, the olfactory bulb, and the olfactory neurons are extremely important. You can see them here on the slide. They have the same characteristics as the neurons. They're long, and they are prolonged downwards that ends with these small hair that actually they also have another opposed pole, which is a longer one, typical of the cells of the nerves. Through this, the cell sends a message to the olfactory bulb, and this is where other contacts are created and neuronal connections are made with other areas of the brain. And this actually is a very complex system of connections. Now I would like to really dwell on what is the generating, the origin of all this. And this is extremely interesting if we look at the molecules, so that is to say chemical entities. So this is an introductory scheme. What you see here is the membrane of the olfactory neuron. We have the smell molecules that in a way generate everything. This receptor, the green one, it's a protein, a macromolecule that is fundamental for any kind of biological process. And this receptor, you can see it here, is actually in contact with something that is within the cell, the so-called protein G. So let's look at the receptor. The smell molecule you can see here is the propionic acid. I chose this example because it has just been studied, the structure in the detail of the single atoms, and this is the first time that something like this is done, of an olfactory receptor, so the protein that links with the odor molecule, and it has been done with the propionic acid responsible for the smell of certain types of cheese. So here you see the complex between the receptor and, well, the odor molecule is the one that has been enlarged in green so that you can see it better where it is positioned. And the complex of this macromolecule, you can see here all the single individual atoms, carbon atoms in gray, in red oxygen atoms, and in blue nitrogen atoms, in yellow sulfur atoms. So the great number of atoms of hydrogen are not represented because otherwise the image would be too difficult to read, but they are there, obviously. So these proteins are all there. There are dozens of thousands of proteins that do different things, and they are made up of these 5 kinds of atoms: hydrogen, carbon, oxygen, sulfur, and nitrogen. And what you see here is an example, but there are so many others in the biological world, of what is called a molecular recognition. And I like to use this word. It's not something that I have made up. It is a technical term that is, well, actually a recognition, an acknowledgement, a recognition because two molecules recognize each other. There's a kind of affinity, of familiarity. The odor molecule is embedded in a certain place within the protein where there is a perfect structural complementarity. So there is a real recognition between two molecules. I would just like to add something here. We saw the interaction between a receptor and an odor molecule. Actually, we can distinguish billions of different odors, but we just have 400 different receptors, like the one you saw before. So there are 400 different kinds of receptors that recognize different groups of molecules. So with 400 receptors, how can we distinguish billions of odors? Well, this happens through an expansion that leads to the fact that individual molecules are acknowledged by different receptors. The odors are generated by the mix of different molecules, and this is an expansion of what we can distinguish. So let's now, what are the consequences of this interaction? As you can see here, when the receptor is linked to the odor molecule, it recognizes, or it can be recognized by another protein, which is that G protein I was talking about before. Here you see the structure of this molecule. As you see, it is more complicated in terms of atom structure, and you see that there is a contact surface. These molecules have, so to say, a familiarity among them that has been developed over the centuries, over millions of years, and this leads to this result. So we have these two molecules recognizing each other, and in this case, we already see two molecules that are mutually significant. So what we have in biological systems in general, and in particular in this system, but it is a universal concept present in all biological processes, there are molecules that turn into signs one for the other. They have a meaning one for the other. So these are interactions that are mutually significant. So what we saw is an interaction between the other molecule and the receptor, which is capable of interacting with something else. And then here on the left, you see the interaction between the other molecule and the receptor, and then you see the G protein. After this interaction with the activated receptor is divided, and you see the blue part called G-olf on the slide, and this creates a molecular recognition with another protein of the membrane. This other protein of the membrane, following this interaction, produces a small molecule which in turn, TAMP, it's the second messenger, creates a complex with another membrane protein, a channel protein. This protein, following the interaction, opens up and lets through the membrane ions of sodium and calcium, which are positively charged, and this creates a difference in potential near the membrane, a depolarization, and this is a signal that gives way to a nervous impulse of the neuron that gives an input to the whole brain system. So, what I wanted to stress is that there is a series of steps, of phases, where a message is delivered and interpreted. The receptor recognizes the odorant molecule as a signal. It then becomes a sign for the G protein, which in turn becomes a sign. The CAMP becomes also a sign that is interpreted. So there is a chain of events that cannot be rationally structured. The only way to look at them is as a biosignal, a series of biosignals. And there is another interesting protein here, because there is also here an increase in the concentration of calcium ions. So in biology, we have the signals due to calcium. So this is a chemical species which is extremely simple, poor, so to say, but the variations of its concentration in biological systems give a very strong signal. And in calmodulin, it finds its main cellular interpreter. So we have again the inactive protein, which is not linked to the calcium. On the right, you see that when you have a certain concentration of calcium, the calmodulin links for calcium ions and changes its shape. So this is the way by which the calcium signal is interpreted. Calmodulin, in turn, when it is activated, it becomes a signal for other molecules. For instance, when calmodulin is linked with calcium, as you see here on the slide or the video, the animation, it actually activates other proteins. So here you see calmodulin linked with calcium that recognizes one of its targets, those pink chemical groups. Well, there is a protein there too, but we didn't represent them. Just a few groups of atoms are represented here on the slide. So in order to sum up what we said so far, all the organisms in their environment interpret signals, but also the cells are the source of science based on integrated events of molecular recognition. So if we go at this molecular level, we arrive at a world that is marked by the affinity between different molecules that recognize each other and become mutually significant. So this is something that is not specific for the olfactory perception. It is something that we find everywhere in the organisms of cells that make their reproduction, metabolism, development possible, that determines in their shape and the molecular tissue. As Giorgio wrote, he was one of the pioneers, so to speak, of the exploration between semiotic and biology. He wrote in one of his works, there is no function of the organism, of any organism, that is not based on specific correspondences between molecules, which are also selective processes in which an interpreter finds signs. So this molecular recognition is therefore largely due to proteins. We have seen what kind of macromolecules proteins are. In humans, there are at least 30,000 different molecules, maybe more. So I would like to talk about how these molecules are built, because again, this is in line with what we were saying. Chemically, proteins are polymers, so they're made by the repeating of simple units called monomers. And in this case, they are amino acids. You can see here the 20 amino acids that make up all the different proteins. You see the chemical structures represented. Each amino acid has a name and is abbreviated with a letter. This is an international code that uses capital letters to identify amino acids. And here you see from the point of view of the amino acid sequence, the structure of the protein. So there is well, it becomes like an unpronounceable word that is made up of the letters identifying the single connected amino acid.
Non sta partendo però.
I have a video, but it doesn't seem to work.
Niente, non deve essere l'ultima versione della... Ah, ecco. Se me lo potete... grazie mille. Ecco, vedete che...
Here we are. You can see here the single amino acid making up the protein. So this polymer falls on itself according to the chemical and physical characteristics of the environment it is in, and it creates a globular structure. So the structure of the receptor we saw before comes from this kind of process. Here you see all the single letters that identify the amino acids in their position in space. So this is a representation of the final results. So you can imagine the great potential in terms of combination, because we have an alphabet of 20 different amino acids that can be used. So we have enormous numbers of possible combinations. So this is this combination potential. But the point is, how do these polymers assemble? Because we find them in cells and organisms, but how are they generated? So here we come to something that is extraordinary. In any cell of any organism, from bacteria to man, each protein is assembled on the basis of, so to speak, a mold. So it is created amino acid by amino acid according to some instructions coming from another polymer, which is chemically completely different, which is ribonucleic acid called messenger acid. So this is the official name, and it's not something that I've made up today. So it is a messenger, and here we have 4 different nucleotides that are the monomers instead of 20 different amino acids. So A, U, G, C. These are the 4 different nucleotides. So how does the system work? There is a message that is written in a different alphabet. So there are other small ribonucleic molecules, tRNA, that make it possible for one of the 20 amino acids is associated to any of the possible sequences of 3 nucleotides. As you see in the example, we have UCG on the messenger RNA. We have a tRNA that has a chemically complementary triplet. And this tRNA is associated with a specific amino acid, alanine. And the video I would like to show you now, I hope it works. You see here the messenger RNA. This is a complex of proteins and nucleic acids that creates these connections. But the key here is the tRNA that has 3 segments, that the 3 nucleotides that will have to recognize the triplets, and on the other side there is the amino acid. So this is the messenger RNA. The tRNAs associated to the mRNA, and the different amino acids are linked one to the other. So this is actually the synthesis of a protein. The way the meaning of a message is created, the message that is contained in the messenger RNA. You see here a table of the universal genetic code. There is a correspondence between amino acids and triplets of nucleotides. Each protein is formed with a process called translation, where a message written in a code is deciphered. This code is called genetic code because the messages, for instance, messengers RNA, are created by copying strings, sequences that are present on the DNA, which is the, so to speak, the genetic memory of organisms. So everything I have tried to share with you is that means that the living world, from the molecular structure of organism as to their behavior in nature, contributes to something. So it is the expression of a meaning for the presence of living beings in nature. There are meanings that open up in nature, and nature reveals itself as a big archive of meanings. So amino acids are the meaning of triplets of amino acids, and in cells there is a continuous interpretation of signals in all organisms, from the simplest ones to the most complex, and in particular in organisms that have a nervous system, the interpretation of signals is a very, very important property. So all these levels, based on the interpretation of signals, belong to us human beings as well. So we have all of this inside of us. And we human beings are linked to the other natural organism because we have the same natural history. But with human beings, the adventure, so to speak, of the meaning of nature goes further. Reason, language, human culture are in a way an enhancement of this dynamic of science. So we all know how we are always committed to in finding what a meaning in what we're living, which goes beyond our sensorial perception. So man looks for further levels of meaning so that every single thing in the world can become a sign for us. And we are, by nature, prone to ask ourselves what the meaning is. So who talks to us through the presence of things? So in the biological world, to understand the meaning of science is vital for any organism. This is something very important for us, human beings, to go beyond in order to find the ultimate meaning in nature is vital, but it is really biologically vital. It's part of our nature. So this need, which is a human need, is in a way religious. And we can find all of this in different sacred texts, holy texts. And we can read that with a different attention now. For instance, I think we all are familiar with Psalm 19, where the firmament proclaims the works of his hands, and it goes through the earth to the ends of the world and celebrates the Creator. For instance, in Surah 2 of the Quran, there is a verse where it is said that the change of nubes and clouds and winds are signs of the Creator, the shifting of the winds. And the verse says, they are signs of the Creator for people of understanding, people who use their minds. So in some comments to this verse of the Quran, we note how the pathway towards meaning is not automatic. It can't be taken for granted. So people of understanding, the verse says. And this is extremely interesting because it is in line with what Father Giussani said when he wrote, the world teaches God as the sign shows that of which it is a sign. By nature, the sign is an event that needs to be interpreted, and in the interpretation of the sign, we achieve our freedom. So this space of freedom is actually the limitless space of human and culture and adventure. And we can start to look at this as something that is connected with the adventure of nature in its history, of which we are a part. So this doesn't mean that we want to limit human freedom. It means that we want to look with different eyes to nature from our vantage point. And I'll stop here.
Grazie Giorgio.
Thank you very much, Giorgio. Hello, everybody. I'll try to somehow link up with what Giorgio just said, and I'll try now to give you some insights about the context where all this happens. Well, all this happens inside an organism, which is our own organism, so the human body. But when it comes to the proteins and the macromolecules that he described and that are so fascinating but complex at the same time, as he said, well, they are made of key building blocks. And these building blocks are the material basis of everything. It's the atoms. Even our body is made of those. So we have carbon, oxygen, nitrogen, and we saw that in the macromolecule and protein animations. These are the building blocks making up biological fabric, even our own tissues, so the tissues of the body that we inhabit. But as scientists, we always ask ourselves questions. So where do these building blocks come from? What are we made of? And where do these building blocks come from? And the most surprising thing is that in order to start answering this question, we need first to ask ourselves another question that apparently has nothing to do with it. So what makes stars shine? Well, unfortunately, it's not usual any longer to be able to watch a beautiful sky full of shining stars. But the real question is, what makes stars shine? And, well, you'll see that the answer to this question will help us find an answer to the other question. Well, probably the star that we know the most, because it's the closest one, is the Sun, which is a medium-sized star, not too big, not too small. And by far, it's the closest star. That's why it's so special to us. Well, our body is made of oxygen, nitrogen, and carbon, mostly. So what is the Sun made of? Well, the answer is pretty different. The Sun and the stars in general are almost exclusively made of hydrogen and helium. These are the two lightest, simplest elements in nature. If you combine the concentration of hydrogen and helium in the Sun, you get more than 90% of the solar mass. All the rest is just dust. It's a very, very small portion. So it's a little portion of carbon and oxygen that instead are so important to us. But what happens at the core of the Sun? The temperature reaches extreme high levels, 15 million degrees. And the density is incredible. The nucleus has a density that is 150 grams per cubic centimeter, dozens and dozens times more than steel. Well, it's like hell. But what does this have to do with the incredible subtlety of the living world? Well, instead, it is pretty crucial, because only in extreme conditions something happens. And this is exactly what makes the Sun and stars shine. And this is exactly what makes the building blocks we're made of. Because at those densities and temperatures, you have nuclear fusion. And this is a topic that we have already addressed during these meeting editions and also previously in the past. So the protons, well, 4 of them in a thermonuclear chain reaction that is pretty complex, well, they merge together and they link up one another and they form a helium-based nucleus made of 2 neutrons and 2 protons. So neutrons are blue, protons are red. And, well, the mass of the helium nucleus is slightly smaller than the mass of the 4 protons that generated it. And that mass difference was transformed into energy. And that's the energy that makes the sun shine, is the high energy photons that are generated in the sun nucleus, and when they emerge from the sun surface become visible light that gives us, the energy that we need to live. So this extremely small mass difference multiplied by the great number of cells that is present in the sun gives what we see. And again, all of these key fundamental nature forces interact, and then you have gravity keeping the star together, giving it a high temperature at the core, and then the electromagnetic force that somehow slows down the pace of all of these reactions, otherwise we would have cosmic bombs. And then the nuclear forces generating the fusion is what you need, well, what is necessary and needed at the same time to keep the luminosity of such a star for billions of years. So the whole biological evolution process required billions of years in the presence of a stable star, providing the right amount of required energy. But then we start understanding that this fusion game is also the process generating the building blocks life needs. So hydrogen merges in order to turn into helium. Helium is slightly more complex. And let's see what happens when whole hydrogen has already been turned into helium. Well, sooner or later, that will occur. Well, it has already occurred for other stars that shone before the sun. And when this happens, the star, gets into a crisis. So in yellow, you see a star the same size as the sun. So when such a star, runs out of hydrogen because it has already been turned into helium entirely, well, for physics-related reasons, well, that star starts to swell, so it gets swollen. It gets bigger and bigger. It becomes a giant red star, much, much bigger. And the nucleus of this star shrinks, and so the temperature, goes down because the hydrogen has been all turned into helium. So when the temperature of this helium core reaches 100 million Kelvin degrees, well, this helium that was inert starts becoming the fuel to generate new energy. So this is a trick. This is an incredible trick of nature. Let's see what happens with 2 helium cores that, because of the high temperature, get closer in spite of the electric forces that would make them drift from one another, but instead the temperature is enough to make them get closer. And has it happened with the protons to form the helium? Well, with 2 helium nuclei, we generate a beryllium nucleus. Unfortunately, beryllium is pretty unstable, and so, well, in just in a tenth of millionth of a billion of seconds, so in a whisk, this beryllium just falls apart. Well, nature fails. Is unable to go on. But if in that nanomicro lapse of time, beryllium exists, and at that point in time, a third helium nucleus gets in and interacts with beryllium, well, suddenly a carbon nucleus forms, something new, and carbon is stable. This is the very same carbon that we find and the macromolecules were made of. And so all the carbon in the universe, including the carbon making up our body, comes from this kind of phenomenon that occurred in stars that shone before the sun. In no other way carbon can exist in nature. And even oxygen, does the same, because then when oxygen interacts in these high temperature stellar furnaces, interacts again with helium, generates a nucleus of oxygen. And this is what happens in star nuclei. I could go on, but, well, rightly, we could ask ourselves, well, this happens in star nuclei, but what about our body? How did carbon end up here in our body? And what about the oxygen in the air? How is it that that oxygen is part of the proteins? Well, this is due to ancient stars that were massive, 8 times bigger than the sun. So when a star is massive, what happens? These thermonuclear chain reactions in the nucleus goes on and on, continues, and up to the point that some sort of shells gets formed. This is just an indication in this graphic. So you have the hydrogen outside and then helium, oxygen, carbon. So as soon as you get closer to the core, the temperature is higher and higher, the density is higher. You can merge somehow and melt more and more elements down to silicium and iron. Iron, for energy reasons, well, is the element that can't melt any longer. It doesn't produce energy if it collides with other nuclei. So what happens? The iron starts accumulating at the center. It doesn't melt any longer. It remains stable. And so the iron nucleus gets bigger and bigger. And then when at one point the iron nucleus reaches a certain mass limit, 1.44 solar masses, gravity presses on this iron mass, and so it wins over the quantic inner pressure. And so we have a huge iron massive star, and it implodes in 1/10 of a second, and then so the star blows up.
Quello che stiamo dicendo.
So what I'm saying is something that we can watch as it happens. We cannot actually look at the core of the sun, but we can see these stellar explosions. You can see the arrow pointing at a star in the large Magellanic Cloud, and on the 22nd of February 1987. That same star the next day was, as you see it in the new, indeed it's a new picture. These are the supernova. So they throw into space all the material that is enriched of all the heavy material that life needs. So there are other rests of supernova that exploded in the past. This is a star that exploded about 1,000 years ago, and it has been studied a lot. And so there is this cosmic movement. And there is this material, this matter that goes back to the interstellar space, and in some of these space regions where it is colder, creates new stars. So in this red ring. This is an extraordinary picture taken with a telescope. And here you see an interplanetary system that is building up. And there are thousands of those in our galaxy. And then there is another star that will evolve and explode, and the star will give back this matter to the interstellar space. So there is a creativity in nature, and these cosmic movements are the cradle of the complexity of life. And this, well, it's actually impressive because it makes look with different eyes at something man has always perceived, that is to say that the universe in some ways is a welcoming place for life. So we see this now with astrophysics and biology and physics, and we literally see it in a constitutive way. We are made up of pieces of the story, of the history, of the cosmic event. So I like to stress that this ancient intuition gave voice to this situation. He who stretches out the heavens like a curtain and spreads them like a tent to dwell in. So we live in the universe. We are made of the curtain, of the tissue that the universe itself has created. And then to conclude, since we owe our life to stars, we are made of stardust, so to say. So where do stars come from? How is it possible that stars happen in the universe? The stars to which we owe all of this. So first of all, we need to realize that what we see when we look at a sky full of stars is just a minuscule part of our galaxy and all its stars. We can see with our naked eye some billions of stars, but our galaxy is made of hundreds of billions of stars. With the Gaia mission, the space telescope that is collecting data for ESA, well, this telescope is mapping billions of stars, about 2 billion of stars. It is a sample of the hundreds of billions of stars present in our galaxy. So you can see here this map. This is our big, great family of stars. But this is not the only galaxy in the world. You know that there are many different galaxies in the world. This is the nearest galaxy to us, M31, the so-called Andromeda's galaxy, and the spot of light you see at the center is made of about 400 billion stars altogether, and they are 1.5 million light years away. So this is light that has traveled for 1.5 million light years with a speed of 300,000 kilometers per second. So this is the ray that you see has been traveling for 2 billion years to get to us. So we see that object as it was 2.5 billion years ago when the light started to move from there. The more we look further in space, the more we go back in time. So this is the galaxy closest to us, but there are so many different galaxies, great quantity in the whole universe, about hundreds of billions of galaxies. And now I'll show you a video that is the result of this slow digital sky service, SDSS, an ongoing project that will be enriched with the new Euclid space mission that has recently been launched. This is a project from the ground, and it mapped about 400,000 galaxies. We'll take a virtual journey that has been reconstructed by the observation of these galaxies one by one, with their position and the distance one from the other. So it's going to be a three-dimensional journey that will give an idea, at least, of the vastity of this universe. The region that we are going to explore with this video is a few billion light years wide. You can hear the sound too, I think.
Ogni punto che vedete in questa animazione,
Every single dot you see is a galaxy that contains hundreds of billions of stars. Every single dot you see.
vedete che tendono.
You see that these galaxies tend to gather in masses of galaxies, and in general, the universe is made up by a quite homogeneous distribution of galaxies.
Ecco, con questo
And, well, we now have a better idea of the vastity of the universe and of how small we are. It is really impressive to look at ourselves in this enormous expansion of space and time. And then we will go back to the question of our being alive, aware. As Pascal said, all bodies, the firmament, the stars, the earth, and its kingdoms are not worth the least of thoughts. For he knows all this and himself, and bodies nothing. So there is something in this being aware of the world that makes the whole world great, bigger, larger, because it's the origin of this possibility, of this acknowledgement of a meaning. And it is even more impressive, another sentence by Pascal: all bodies together and all minds together, all our theories and thoughts and knowledge, and all their productions are not worth the slightest movement of charity. This is of an infinitely higher order. So there is something in this gratuity, in this miracle of gratuity in the human being that goes beyond all the materiality of the world and all the thoughts we might have on the world. So this goes way, way beyond. So we conclude now. So we are saying that galaxies extend throughout the universe. The furthest galaxies are about 13 billion light years. This is an image from the JWST, a space telescope sent into the space by NASA, these reddish galaxies that you see in this picture are those that are the furthest, so about 13 billion light years away. So they show us what the universe looked like 13 billion years ago. And we know that the universe had just started to expand then. So this space continues to grow. It started to expand 13 billion years ago, 13.5 billion years ago to be precise. So if we go even further, and this light will give us a message that is closer to the origin. The black curtain that is the background of all these images, just like a starred sky, is not really black, not homogeneously black. If we look at it today with the right tools, devices, machines, we realize that it shines off a very small light that is the first light of the universe. And we managed to have an image of that universe that started to expand, started to form stars, galaxies, and planets at a time when the universe was similar to what happens today in the core of a star. High density, high temperatures. The Planck satellite did this, what you see now. He gathered this light that had traveled for 13.8 billion years, and here you can see the newborn universe, where we can see the beginning of those structures that will then originate galaxies, planets, and stars. So you see the differences here in colors in this image that refer to different densities. These are the embryos of the cosmic structures. This red strip is our galaxy. You can see it again now. This blue and red image is the image of microwaves. The red stripe is our galaxy, but all in all, we have the image that you see here in this slide. It is actually a real picture of this newborn universe that shows us in these slight differences in densities highlighted by the different colors, the beginning of the creation of the structures of the universe, stars, galaxies, planets, the whole of the universe in its complexity. So, well, thus, thanks to our observation, thanks to the laws of physics that let us interpret these observations, so we can retrace the steps of the history of the universe from the moment when 13.8 billion years ago it started to expand to the different differences, the slight differences of density, to the first complexity of the universe with the formation of planets and stars, and on one of these planets, 3.5 billion years ago, that story of complexity began, the story of life. So every time we are surprised that the story of life roots back into the story of the whole universe. We could not have DNA or proteins if we hadn't hydrogens that formed helium, that formed carbon, that formed oxygen, and all the elements that are the building blocks of our physical beings. This could not have happened without the stars which gave the universe the possibility to express itself. And paradoxically, as Pascal used to say, bigger than all of this vastity, there is this point of conscience of the universe where the meanings we want to grasp is the meaning of the whole of the cosmic history. The universe as the sign of something else. The same universe that made it possible, made our life as a physical beings possible. So again, let's go back to ancient words. My bone was not hid from thee when I was made in secret, and curiously wrote in the lowest parts of the earth. Thank you.
Grazie. Grazie a Marco e Giorgio per aver condiviso.
Thanks to Marco and Giorgio, who shared with us this love for the natural world with a look at man, but it's also the result of your friendship. So you said so before. Every time we find new connections, we increase our knowledge of reality, and this corresponds to a deeper comprehension. So there is some kind of surprise. Today I felt this a surprise that is actually gives us something new, something more. It's more than just knowledge from the atom that of which we are made to the universe. It's a knowledge that changes us. So it's a small piece of knowledge that changes our way to look at life. So I would like to thank you for this. Thank you. And I would just like to remind you that the Ulysses Association this year has organized an exhibition. So if you have not visited yet, I encourage you to do so. And then again, I'd like to remind you that the Rimini meeting was the result of a friendship, and it continues to focus on these relationships among peoples and cultures. So by supporting the Rimini meeting, you help creating a different society, a place of encounter. So you can find the stands with the red heart called Dona Ora, Donate Now, where you can actually contribute to the creation of this new culture. Thank you.
Civiltà dell'amore, fratelli e sorelle, costruite senza stancarvi mai questa civiltà. Lavorate per questo, pregate per questo, soffrite per questo.
Religioso o l'esperienza religiosa è innanzitutto un fatto, un fenomeno obiettivo, un fatto reale, non è un'idea, innanzitutto non è un modo di sentire, non solo si tratta di un fatto, di un avvenimento, ma del fatto più imponente e più inestirpabile della storia dell'uomo. Più imponente, più vasto, che neanche il fenomeno dell'amore dell'uomo e della donna, che neanche il fenomeno del rapporto tra genitori e figli. Perché il senso religioso è un avvenimento che pone, che afferma o che ricerca l'orizzonte entro il quale acquisti senso anche il rapporto tra l'uomo e la donna, anche il rapporto tra genitori e figli. Perciò è più vasto, perfino di quelli.
Dieci racconti di solidarietà e aiuto concreto. Storie ricche d'amore, riscatto, coraggio e cura. Storie di persone che donano e che ispirano a costruire una società inclusiva. Una mano a chi sostiene. Storie.